like lost a key to a cabinet, took somebody else's coffee mug, right? Was late for an important meeting. It was a trigger that caused trouble, which led to a relationship change. So they had to reason from that trouble trigger to an explanation of why the relationship changed. So Mike used to like Beth, but she took his coffee cup and didn't wash it, so now Mike doesn't like Beth anymore. Like that. And in a complex reasoning task, it was the same thing, but involving more, if you like, relationship changes that were caused by the trouble trigger. As I said, if you read the chapter in the book, and if you read his dissertation, he's done a number of papers that are cited in the references there, describing this task in much more detail. So how did he analyze his data? Here's a bit of the data. I have a report that is one clause, one T unit. It passed 1 week. It's one T unit. I know it's missing the verb there, but it's one. The relationship in our section is very complicated. Another T unit, right? So breaking it up into clauses or T units. So there are 3 T units, 1 error. That's it passed 1 week. So the percentage of error for T units is 66%, right? Only 1 of them has an error. 2 of them don't. 66% accurate. Complexity. In each of those T units, there is just 1 verb, 1 clause. So it's average number of T units or clauses per T unit is 1. Lexical density, this is how we did it, right? This is type token ratio, right? Do you know these terms? Words, whenever you know, just going back to this, I have a report that is 4 tokens, 4 words. And each word is a different type of word. So 4 tokens, 4 words, 4 divided by 4, that's 1. The type token ratio is 1. Which indicates you're using in that 1 T unit a wide variety of vocabulary. You're not repeating the same word more than once. But it passed 1 week. Okay, so there we've got, now we have, with those 2 clauses, we have 4 words, 5, 6. I'm not sure if he used prune, but it passed 1 week. It looks in that short amount of speech, right? And this is the problem with type token ratio. When you have a short amount of speech, it's very likely that each word you produce is going to be a different word. But the longer the passage, the more likely it is that you're going to repeat one of the words. So the type ratio is going to go down, right? I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So to calculate, so to adjust for that, he used what's called Giraud's index, which is you use the square root of the number of tokens to adjust for the length difference between different passages. So in summary, lexical density is type token ratio. The number of different types of words you use as a proportion of the number of actual words you use. When you get a large number of types, that means greater lexical density relative to a number of tokens. Speech rate unpruned. This is, I think here, what he means by unpruned is repetitions were included, right? So, but it passed 1 week. He would use both hits in measure of speech rate. He calculated it as this speech rate here. Oh, these are the actual analyses. So lexical density of that passage above there is 4.23, using that Giraud's index measure. Total word types is 8, divided by the square root of the number of tokens, which is 4.25. So 18 divided by 4.25 is 4.23. Speech rate is 20 times 10. So it's 20 words times 10, divided by the length of time it took, which was 15 seconds, equals 3.3 words per 10 seconds. the measure of speech growth. Here's some of the data anyway. So those are general measures. And this is the simple no reasoning task. Hi, this is manager. I'd like to tell you about our staff, relationship of our staff, about Kate and John are getting well. She's not get along with Nick and Kathy, and about Kathy only get along with Nick. Not good about Kate and John. And John are good relation with Kate and Nick, but he is not getting along with secretary Kathy. Finally, Nick, she was not good well with Kate, but he get along with John and Kathy very well, thanks. So just telling you about the relationships. In the simple reasoning, this is where they had to attribute changes in relationships to a cause. Hello, this is manager. I have to tell you, we have a problem. Section chief, Mike, and secretary had some problem between them. First, they have deleted the data on a computer, which is for presentation, all complex syntax going in there, yeah? Relative clause. At a client next day, so Mike, very upset, reference to his mental state. And Mike said something to Beth. Now Beth is very angry, again, reference to her mental state reaction to that. So, all of these causal conjunctions, right? So, therefore, their relationship is not right, well, right now, thank you. And the complex one. This is where there's 4 people whose relationships change in response to some trouble in the workplace. And you can see this is getting longer, right? So if we go back, this is a lot shorter than this one. And so we have to control for that difference in length because it affects the type-token ratio. If you only say one sentence, you're very likely to use different words each time you produce a word. But if you produce 10 sentences, it's likely, very likely, that you're going to repeat the same word, and that will reduce the type-token ratio. So he controlled for the length of text by using that Giraud's index. So here's the complex reasoning. Hello, this is a manager calling. We have problem. And the secretary, and lost the document. It was very important for Joe. Joe, section chief. Joe. So Joe's very upset, and Joe knew, cognitive states end there. Joe knew it was Anne's fault. And you can see no has the syntactic complementation, so that's complex syntax, right? The subordinate clause there. Knew it was Anne's fault and got angry about Anne. Then section chief Sue and Bob looked for the document with Anne. They finally found the document, so there is not any problem, but Bob was kind of angry because, causal connected there, it looked childish. So Anne also, don't so, right? You see all of these causal conjunctions coming in. So Anne don't like Joe anymore. So our section is not getting well right now. What should we do now? I'll call you again. Thanks. I think we could agree in a sense that language is more complex than the first language, or it appears so. What were the actual findings? And I forget how many people were in the study. I think it was about 22. And it was repeated measures. So each of them performed the simple and the complex. But it was sequencing was controlled for. So some did the simple one first, some did the complex one first. So factoring out sequence, each person performed all versions of the task. And we find that I don't think there are any effects on fluency. This is, whoops, can you see that? Unproven speech rate. This is the number of words per 10 seconds, is that right? That they produce. It's about 1.4 for all of them. So no, that doesn't confirm the cognition hypothesis. It doesn't, the reasoning demands don't affect fluency of speech using that measure. What about complexity? Here he did find an effect. It doesn't look like very much of an effect, but on the NR, which is no reasoning, there are 1.2 S nodes per T unit, and on the other two reasoning demand tasks, there are slightly more, 1.4. Given the size of the sample, this was a significant difference, but there's no difference between simple and complex, which is what the cognition hypothesis predicts, right? More reasoning, more complexity. What we see here is reasoning, you get more complexity than no reasoning. Lexical density, same story. The type-token ratio is much lower on the no reasoning demands than it is on the simple and the complex. There's no difference between the simple and the complex. So what conclusion we can draw here from here is that complexity operationalized as plus reasoning leads to more complexity, syntactic, and lexical density than no reasoning. But there's no difference between simple versus complex reasoning, if you like. And I think the same finding was found for accuracy, error-free T units. So what he finds is an effect for complexity, that is, intentional reasoning leads to greater accuracy, more complexity, and more lexical density. He doesn't find an effect for fluency, though, in this study. Now, he used general measures, and I've talked about specific measures. And let me give just, so this is yours truly. This is a study from 2007, which seems a long time ago now. So I sort of also did a study of intentional reasoning demands, which was operationalized in the following way. Learners had to look at pictures describing events in a story in which there were 1, 2, or 3 participants. And then, speakers, and then they had to decide which order they went in, and they had to tell the story in that order to a listener who then put the pictures in the correct order. So the reasoning was involved in the speaker first deciding which order the pictures went in. Now, I can't show you the pictures because they're part of the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, actually. So we know that they differ in complexity because in the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale Japanese version, this is a test used to determine whether or not people are able to reason about other people's minds and the consequences of them. People have to decide which order pictures go in, and they get a score. Yes, correct, no, incorrect, for their ability to sequence pictures. And it goes from very easy to very complex. So in some sense, we have external ability for this as a measure of this task as a measure of intentional reasoning demands. It's based on the Wechsler intelligence scale subtest, picture arrangement subtest. And then, so we were looking at the effects of actually telling the story that those picture sequences described on learners' language. And here I was looking at, as I told you, those psychological state terms. And I used general and specific measures. Now, general production indices, these are clauses per C unit. I won't go into this in much detail. Essentially, clauses per C unit, S nodes per T unit, essentially the same. Type token ratio, that's the one that Tomohito used. That's a measure of lexical density or lexical complexity. Words per T unit, arguably, this is a measure of complexity too. Because the more words there are in the T unit, the more complex it is. I've sometimes called that measure of fluency because there's no qualitative difference in the syntactic complexity of the T unit, it's just got more words in it. For accuracy, I use error-free C units. And for fluency, words per C unit, syllables per second. Right, so we've got general measures of accuracy, fluency, and complexity. Now, I read a paper in 2002, which is very interesting, and you might want to read the same one. It's by Lee and Rescola, and it talks about this difference I was mentioning earlier, about children at age 3 to 4. And it was comparing the language production of children who had been diagnosed as autistic or towards the autistic end of the spectrum. It was analysing the population of learners who were sort of diagnosed as autistic with what's called an unimpaired population, who are normally functioning in terms of their ability to understand the reasons why other people did things in terms of mental states. And their study was a study of whether or not autism would, at this stage in development, 3, 4, affect language production. And they found that it did. And they used specific measures, specific in the sense that they're used in child language acquisition research, but they're focusing not so much on general issues of complexity, but specific ones, like whether or not children use infinitival phrases, like he likes to eat rice, which is generally acknowledged as quite a complex, late-emerged aspects of language production for children, using that. It's got 2 verbs, right? Likes, the inflected form, and to eat, the uninflected form. Simple conjoinings, whether or not children use that as causal connectives, like so, which again are sort of more advanced aspects of children's language development than not using those. And WH clauses, this is where you go, right? WH clauses used as a subordinate clause. Right? Again, that's something latent in child development. So I use the same measures as Lee and Rescorla. And IPSIN refers to index of productive syntax. So these are specific measures of complexity, if you like, in the sense of infinitival, conjoining, and WH clauses. We think they're things that contribute to the emerging complexity of children's language, but I was looking at whether or not they characterize second language learners' production on the intentional reasoning demands task compared to the non-intentional reasoning. And I also looked at specific measures in the sense of psychological state terms, like physiological, hot, emotional, happy, desire, wants, and cognitive thinking. As I've said, when I did this, I think, I'm trying to remember now, 2007. I think each person performed 3. They had a very simple reasoning, medium-level reasoning narrative task, and a very complicated one. Yeah, they had 3 levels of complexity of intentional reasoning. So the first picture strip, they had to put the pictures in order and tell the story. There's, just 3 pictures, and the reasons why one person performed an action were relatively transparent. On the final one, that was much less obvious, and so they made that the final. So the third one was most complex, medium, and then simple. And so I was looking at the effects of intentional reasoning on these indices, and here are the results. And I'll show you a table in a minute. More complex tasks result in more reference to psychological states, which is what we expect, right? The more intentional reasoning, the more you refer to psychological states, like think, know, want, believe, whatever. Psychological states, would be emotional states, like angry, physiological states, like hot, and desire states, like want. And cognitive states are think, know, wonder. And there are also higher measures of these per term, because of course on complex tasks people speak more, so you want a ratio measure. It's not the fact that they use more psychological state terms or cognitive state terms, it's that they use more of these in each term they produce. It's a ratio measure. To control, if you like, for the fact that complex tasks simply result in large amounts of speech compared to simple ones. So you want a ratio measure of the occurrence of these terms in each term. And complex tasks elicit more later developed referential terms used to describe mental states, and these require complex syntactic complementation, thinks that she, wonders why he, etc. Now, here is a table. What does this show us, right? This is the use of psychological state terms. Physiological, psychological state terms, that's the first column. This is think, know, wonder. So what have we got here? We've got a mean. This is the mean in total performance on the simple task, 0.24, which means that not many learners use them on the simple task. On the complex task, they're using more, 2 on average, on the complex task. There's not much difference in physiological and emotional terms, state terms, or desire state terms. When we look at cognitive state terms, there's a difference, 0.09. They don't use many of these on the simple task, but they use a lot more on the complex task. And using the ratio measures, we see that it's significant for physiological and cognitive state terms. So, if you like, the intentional reasoning demands are causing them, forcing them, if you like, to use more cognitive state terms and physiological state terms. And here we've got, I don't know if I'll go into that. So it seems like that increasing the intentional reasoning demands can lead to qualitatively different speech along those, using those specific indices. And here, what have I got here? This, again, I might be going too far into this, but this is a correlation of a general index of speech production, clauses per C unit, with a specific one. And what can we see here? We can see, so the general unit of analysis is clauses per C unit, CPC. And the specific units of analysis are infinitival phrases, conjoined clauses, and WH clauses. And another specific unit of analysis is cognitive state terms. So we're looking at a correlation here. What do we find? We see that on the complex task, just looking at the bottom, that so we're looking at the correlation of clauses per C unit, which are general, and cognitive state terms, which are specific, with the use of infinitival phrases. We see that on the simple task, there's a correlation of both with the use of infinitival phrases. And on the complex task, there's a correlation of only cognitive state terms with the use of infinitival phrases. So what does this mean? It seems that a general measure like clauses per C unit and a specific measure like cognitive state terms are correlating in different ways with a specific measure such as infinitival phrases. They're not quite telling us exactly the same thing. Yeah? Overall, I think we can see, if we look at the cog columns, yeah, cognitive state terms, that they correlate more with simple and complex task performance than clauses per C unit. So it looks like, cognitive state terms are a more sensitive measure of the use of complex syntax such as infinitival phrases, conjoined clauses, and WH clauses than a general measure such as clauses per C unit is. Maybe that's a bit elusive. Okay, go on to a different topic now. This is some research I did with Teresa Pediano a few years ago. And here we're using specific measures of English to examine task performance on tasks that require reference to motion. Yeah. And there's an interesting typological difference between English and Danish, between Japanese and English, and also Japanese and Danish, as you know. So I'm pursuing the issue here of using a specific rather than a general measure as a way of capturing differences in task performance on tasks making different conceptual demands. And in this case, what we were looking at was essentially what I showed you earlier, the story that required somebody to tell a story while they were looking at pictures, compared to telling a story while they had to remember it and tell it from memory. But if you do remember those pictures, they involve motion, like Mr. Brown comes out of the shop, and the wind blows the hat off his head, and the tramp catches the hat and throws his own hat back to Mr. Brown, and then the tramp passes Mr. Brown on the street, etc. Now, involved in telling that story, you have to make reference to motion and manner of motion. Well, you don't have to, but you can. The task elicits reference to motion. And so we were interested not simply in general measures, whether or not they were more accurate, complex, and fluent and less fluent on the complex version. We were interested in the specific use of their verbs to describe reference to motion on simple versus complex. And I'll tell the story a little bit like this. Japanese and English are typologically different. That is, in English, as you probably know, manner of motion is typically coded on the verb, right? So we say rushed, yeah, versus amble or stumble. So motion, the act of being in motion, is accompanied by manner in many verbs in English. Yeah? Manner comes for free, if you like, when you describe motion. And